Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. I'm Spencer Simpson.
And I'm Kelton Howell, and today we're going to be talking about cards that you should try playing in your Commander decks. We put together a list of cards that we've been trying out in Commander decks, and we've had a lot of fun with, and we think you will too. So if you haven't run these cards, if you haven't tried them yet, I think it's worth giving a shot.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind is that some of these effects are better suited for more casual pods. So a lot of more highly powered decks are a lot more optimized and don't necessarily need these effects. But in your more casual decks, I think these will have a really good spot. And some of these have been pet cards for us that we've played for a long time. But some of these are ones we've discovered recently. So we're really excited to talk about them.
Yeah, and they're just cards that we think have made a really fun play experience at the table and in our play group. And that's why I think they're worth playing. So
yeah, absolutely. So we're going to kick things off with interaction, and we're going to start with bounce spells. Kelton, this is something you've been playing a lot recently.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot more bounce spells. I think that hard removal, especially counter spells at lower power level tables, can feel just really bad. And so bounce still takes care of the threat. Maybe only temporarily, though. They can still play that thing, and it really is just a tempo play against the player. And in a way, it's also a bit of a political move in that bounce spells, or spells that return creatures to somebody's hand, or I think tuck is the term for returning it to a deck, that these say, hey, everybody at the table who was worried about this thing, I took care of the threat for like a turn, so now you all need to figure out a way to deal with it more permanently. And I kind of like that as well. It's a bit of a social play as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they play a giant 7-mana creature, and you get to say, this is coming down next turn. Someone watch out for it. I've dealt with it now. Someone else better have some interaction up.
Exactly. I like that you mentioned mana creatures, because you play a lot of pod effects that get big, scary 7-mana creatures. And those are frequently the creatures that we have to deal with and that I'm using this kind of removal on.
Oh, yes. Love me a good Toxrill the Corrosive.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. One of the scariest cards to play against, and one of the cards that I remove with the most vigor as soon as I see it on the battlefield. So some of the ways that I am trying to remove that spell are cards like Remand. Remand is 1 and a blue for an instant. You counter target spell, and if it's countered this way, you put it into its owner's hand instead of the player's graveyard, and then you get to draw a card. So it's actually removal. It's a counter spell that replaces itself, which is really good, and it's really cheap. There's also a white version of this card that was printed in the Lord of the Rings set called Reprieve. It does the same exact thing. It's 1 and a white. There's also one of my favorite cards, Memory Lapse, which is 1 and a blue for an instant, counter target spell. But if the spell is countered this way, you put it on top of their library instead of that player's graveyard. I know you just love this spell.
Memory Lapse is great. It completely blanks your next turn. It doesn't feel particularly good, but it also feels better than your spell being completely countered. One thing I really like about a lot of these too is that they all say counter target spell. Often it's hard when you're running counter spells, especially the ones that are more affordable in either budget decks or in lower power decks, are outside of like true counter spell, which is blue counter target spell. A lot of them say counter target non-creature spell or counter target instant sorcery. And the fact that these are just blanket counter target spell is really, really good, because it does deal with those creatures that are going to hit the battlefield that typically are your bigger threats at lower power tables.
Yeah, and if you're way ahead, then it also can disrupt a board wipe, for example, and give you an extra turn to use the advantage that you have accrued on your side of the board. And I think maybe one more to mention here that's worth mentioning is Delay. This is 1 and a blue for an instant. You counter target spell. Once again, it's just any spell. And if the spell is countered this way, you exile it with 3 time counters on it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard, and then it gets Suspend, which is at the beginning of its owner's upkeep, they get to remove a time counter, and then when the last one's removed, then they get to cast that spell for free. And actually, I didn't know this, but if it's a creature, it gains haste. I hadn't ever read that on Suspend cards before.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. That's actually really cool.
But anyways, it does the same thing where it's like, okay, you don't get that spell right now, but you can play it again later. And
yeah, a couple turns from now, you get to cast it again. And these are all examples of bounce spells for spells that are on the stack, but there are a lot of effects that also deal with bounce creatures or other permanents that are on the battlefield. One of the most famous being Cyclonic Rift, right? Because it has the single mode, which almost nobody casts it for in Commander, because everyone's looking for that big blowout. It's 1 and a blue, return target permanent to its owner's hand, and then it has Overload for 6 and a blue. Return
I want to know what Overlord is.
Overlord
Now
is
that sounds like a sweet
mechanic.
keyword.
It's a mechanic coming up. Watch out for Overlord, the mechanic. Overload for 6 and a blue, which is return each non-land permanent to its owner's hand that you don't control, right? Yeah. So it's really, really good. But other effects like that, one of my favorite that I've been trying to run in decks recently is Snap.
Snap is really good.
So good. 1 and a blue, return target creature. I think it's only creatures to its owner's hand. I'm sorry, I should have been prepped to pull that one up here. Return target creature to its owner's hand. And you also untap 2 lands. Yeah. So it's virtually free interaction.
Which is really cool.
Which is really, really cool. So you can still use that mana to like crack a clue or whatever, but still deals with one of the threats on board.
Absolutely. And hopefully, like we said, it's less feel bad than some hard removal or hard counter spells.
Yeah, and don't get us wrong, we still run hard removal. Like, you should be running destroy or exile effects, because those are really important. But it has been really fun to replace some of it with this, because people still get to play their decks, but you get to get a little bit of a tempo play. Exactly.
The next category that we want to talk about are bolt bend effects. So this is another thing that we've been trying out more recently. I think these spells are played quite a bit. A lot of the spells that we mentioned before are played quite a bit as well. But if you're not trying them, you should. They're pretty good. The most famous of these effects is probably Deflecting Swat, which is the free bolt bend effect, where if you control your commander, you can cast it without paying its mana cost, and you just change the target of a spell on the stack. So if someone's trying to remove your commander or an important piece of your value engine, then you can redirect it towards something else. And obviously, the name for this effect comes from another card called Bolt Bend, which is 3 in a red. The spell costs 3 or less if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, and you just change the target spell or ability that has a single target.
Yeah, I think one thing that makes Deflecting Swat obviously like the best version of this is not only that it's free, but it also says you may choose new targets for target spell or ability. So if it's something that targets like a bunch of things, you can just completely change the targets. Yeah. A lot of these only work with a single target, but often that's enough, right? You're just trying to protect the one creature. So like Kilton was saying, Bolt Bend costs 4 mana. It only costs 1 if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. You get to change the target of a spell that targets a single creature or permanent with a single target. Doesn't even matter the target. Yep. Yeah. You have Imp's Mischief, which is in black. It's 1 and a black for an instant. Changes the target of target spell with a single target, and you lose life equal to that spell's mana value. A very black effect. One that Misdirection is a really popular one in blue. You get to cast it for free if you exile a blue card from your hand, and same effect, change the target of target spell with a single target. One that I think is really cool that I found while I was looking into this is Muckdrub.
Yeah.
Which is... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I've only seen this card once before, and I totally forgot about it until you put it on the list.
Yeah, it's amazing. You want to tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. It's 3 black for a 3/3 beast with flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you can change the target of target spell that targets only a single creature to Muckdrub. And the art is also just really great on this card, because it's this really sad looking creature that like all of the bad things get redirected towards this creature, and it's just absolutely miserable.
It's amazing.
And interestingly enough, it also has Madness 2 and a black. So if you have an effect that allows you to discard cards at instant speed, you can really get some sweet value out of that.
Yeah, you can do it for 2 less. And I specifically am excited about this one because I've been making turning one of my decks into an Umori, not partner, companion deck. So it only runs creatures. Cool. And so I'm really happy to find an effect that deals with spells on a creature.
And this would be good in your Strephon deck too, potentially, if you're looking for like more black interaction. And that's actually something I wanted to mention about all these bolt bend style effects. A lot of these happen in colors that don't normally get interaction at instant speed that can deal with targeted removal. So black and red, Imp's Mischief is such a great card to run in like a mono black deck. No one is going to think that you have interaction to counter one of their spells or to redirect one of their spells. And Imp's Mischief does that, and it kind of comes out of nowhere. And same with a lot of the red effects as well. I think it's a really powerful effect to have in these colors.
Yeah, for sure. I think in like the realm of protection, heroic intervention and like Teferi's protection get a lot of the hype because they protect your entire board, which is like obviously very huge. Board wipes are a real thing, but often like you're just trying to protect a single creature or your commander from targeted removal, and these will have the exact same effect and sometimes be better than things that like give indestructible, because it could be like an exile effect or a minus effect, so it will save you from those, and then on top of that, it doesn't just stop the spell, it points it somewhere else.
Yeah.
So you get to choose. So not only does your thing stay safe, you get to remove someone else's creature or permanent.
Which is really good. Or benefit if it's something that targets a player, like a player gets to draw cards, you can be like, oh, I'll take all of those cards. And that is also super powerful.
Yes, that's really huge. That's something I've been learning in CDH recently that I've not thought about very much is people will cast stuff like Peer into the Abyss to draw half of their deck, and someone has their commander out, and you need to be aware that I'm worried about people countering it, but then someone just says, okay, deflecting swat, now I draw half my deck, which is just, these effects are really cool, and we think you should run them more.
They're awesome. The next ones that we want to talk about are transformation removal. So this is a kind of removal where you are changing out their creature or their permanent for something else. I really like to play these effects. I think they're super fun. One of my pet cards is Kenrith's Transformation, which is 1 and a green for an enchantment aura. You enchant creature, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So first off, it's removal that replaces itself, which I love. And then the enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3.
Oh my gosh.
So when Spencer plays Toxtrol the Corrosive, I can turn it into a 3/3 elk that doesn't do anything else. And I get a draw card off of it, which is great.
I forgot that this card cantrips.
Yeah.
And that is so
It's what makes
crazy.
it so good.
Yeah, that's incredibly good. Well, even if it didn't cantrip, these types of effects are like super backbreaking.
Yeah.
Right? Like, especially if you don't have, I play a lot of aristocrats and sacrifice style effects, but if you aren't playing anything that can sacrifice commander, you have to make a deal with somebody to trade with it or destroy it somehow, or else your commander's just gone for the rest of the game.
But if I turn your Toxtrol into a 3/3, nobody is going to block that to let you get it back.
No,
Everyone is just going to take 3 damage.
No, yeah, absolutely. They're very, very good effects people should play more of. Some more examples of these are things like Imprisoned on the Moon, which is 2 and a blue, enchant creature, land, or planeswalker. It's an enchantment aura. And Enchanted Permanent is a colorless land with tap, add a colorless mana, and loses all of their card types and abilities.
It's so good.
Really good.
It's so good. Actually, one thing I never noticed, does this add waste mana? Waste mana, not colorless mana?
Yes, I don't know the distinction off the top of my head, but the symbol says it adds waste, at least.
Interesting. I've actually just never noticed that. That must be a flavor thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's because it's Eldrazi. They're in the art. They're imprisoning Emrakul in the moon. So because it is an Eldrazi, they make it so it taps for waste, which is sorry. That's totally sidetracked. But I'd never noticed that before.
That's an interesting discussion though for another time. I'm going to continue sidetracking us because Sol Ring. I feel like I've seen printings of Sol Ring that say tap, add 3.
Oh.
Yeah. Or add 2, not 3.
Yeah, because that's how they represent colorless mana, is generally with a number.
And then there's also some printings that have the waste symbol. So that's something we'll have to maybe talk about another time. Another example here is Darksteel Mutation. In white, 1 and a white, enchantment aura, enchant creature, is an insect artifact creature with base power and toughness 0/1 and has indestructible, and it loses all of the abilities and card types.
So they can't even destroy it once you've transformed it. It is just a 0/1.
It just sticks. Although I have seen this come back to bite people if you're casting this and you have no way to trample through with damage. This just blocks.
Sure.
It just blocks forever.
Yeah, that's true. That is the drawback to this one, but it is a lot harder to remove, which is awesome.
100%. Yeah, like we were saying, this this type of effect can really blow people out, and might be worthwhile if you find it hard to deal with your friend's commander or a specific card they're playing that they keep reanimating or whatever. And I think I probably should play some of these against Kelton Shieldred deck. That is one that has drawn my ire specifically, and so maybe
I think you feel similarly about Shieldred as I do about Toxrill.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. Okay, so the next one we want to talk about here, we don't want to go too deep into because I think I wanted to talk about one of these specifically, but as I was looking into it, I really liked the effects on the other ones as well, and it's the Strixhaven Masteries. So some of these aren't technically interaction, but the one that got us talking about it is Baleful Mastery, which is one that I was really, really excited about. So it's 3 and a black for an instant, and it's exile target creature or planeswalker. But you can pay 1 and a black rather than pay the spell's mana cost. And if you do, an opponent draws a card. And this is going to be the theme for all of these masteries. Is there some sort of alternate cost, and then you have to give an opponent a benefit for not having paid the full cost of the spell.
Exactly. And what's crazy about this card that you pointed out, which is really interesting, is you don't have to give the card to the player that you're removing their creature.
Oh.
So it's just like, Spencer, I'm going to exile your creature and I'm going to give someone else a card.
Yes.
Which just feels doubly bad for
so
you.
Mean. It's so funny. It's 2 mana removal and you get to give them an extra, and someone else draws it. Oh, I love it so much.
It's a great card. Some of the other ones that are really cool are like Devastating Mastery. This is the white one. It's super hard to cast. It's 2 white, so 4 white pips for a sorcery, and you destroy all non-land permanents. So it's a board wipe, but you can cast it for 4 instead, and if you do, an opponent gets to return up to 2 non-land permanents they control to their hand first. So they get to save a couple things before you board wipe. Obviously, not something you want to do. There may be other better board wipe effects, but the thing that I like about these, and a lot of the kinds of effects that we're talking about today, are that they create more social situations and more social interactions where you can say, hey, board wipes feel bad, but here, this is going to affect you way worse than it affects everyone else. You can save a couple things. You can return a couple things to your hand. And I just like that. I just like the added social interaction. Yeah,
absolutely. You can either make an ally or choose the person at the table who's not doing so hot, give them an advantage here. Honestly, I think this one's so good. It's a Wrath of God, right? Mm-hmm. That lets someone return stuff to their hand, which sometimes isn't that big of a deal, and also hits non-creatures, which I think is really cool.
That's true. Yeah. I guess I'm underestimating that because I'm thinking like Wrath of God style effects, but that is only creatures, and this hits all non-land permanents. Yeah. Which is really good against artifact decks and enchantress decks and planeswalkers. Yeah. That's pretty good.
I think it's so cool. I think it's honestly like a strictly better Wrath of God, except that someone gets to return stuff, which, sometimes maybe choose the guy that has 2 7-mana things that he can't cast in the same turn or whatever.
And the other thing that's so good about this is that you still can cast it for its full mana cost. If you just have 6 mana and 4 white pips to just throw into this and you don't care about anything else, then you can just cast it as a 6 mana destroy all non-land permanent spell, and that's also totally fine. So the flexibility also makes it really good.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other 2 here, we'll talk about really briefly, are Verdant Mastery, which is 5 and a green for a sorcery. Its alternative cost is 3 and a green. You search your library for up to 4 basic land cards and reveal them. Put 1 on the battlefield tapped under an opponent's control if the 3 and a green was paid. Put 2 on the battlefield tapped under your control and the rest into your hand. Pretty sweet. Like, this is, not Sky Shroud Claim, but close. Yep. And you get to ramp somebody else who's maybe not doing so good. And the other one is Ingenious Mastery. X, 2 and a blue. And you can pay just 2 and a blue instead. And if you paid that cost, you draw 3 cards, and then an opponent creates 2 treasure tokens and scries 2, which is a lot. Yeah. And then if it wasn't paid, you draw X cards. So there's some trade-offs to these.
Yeah. You didn't want to talk about Fervent Mastery? You didn't like that one?
I didn't like Fervent Mastery. I thought Fervent Mastery was objectively bad.
It's wild. I do want to read it just to complete the cycle here.
Yeah,
and
go
because
ahead.
it's a really funny, interesting card. It's 3 red for a sorcery. You search your library for up to 3 cards, put them into your hand, shuffle, then discard 3 cards at random. So it's a gamble, except for you do it with 3 cards instead of 1. And then its alternative casting cost is only 1 cheaper. It's 2 red. And if that cost was paid, an opponent discards any number of cards, then draws that many cards. So if you cast it for 1 less mana, it gives someone a Valakut Awakening.
Yeah.
Which is so wild.
It is the worst, I think far and away the worst one on this list. Because, so the meme is that gamble, which is you search your library for a card, and then you discard a card at random, right? 1 mana, sorcery. The meme is that gamble is the red Entomb, which is you search your library for a card and put it into your graveyard, right? So to me, this is the 5 mana red buried alive, right?
Yes, it's so true.
Is you just get to search for 3 cards and they end up in your graveyard. And if you do it for 1 less, then somebody
Someone
gets
else
to just
gets to-
shape their hand. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah. Anyway, these are the fun cards, really fun ways to interact with the table. The next one we want to talk about are multimodal cards. So these are cards that will lend your deck a lot more flexibility. And there are lots of different types of effects that have this kind of multimodal effect.
Yeah, so the first one that we want to talk about is Channel. This was a really cool mechanic that came from the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty set. And it's an ability that lets you pay mana and discard that card from your hand to gain an effect. And Spencer, one of your favorites of this is Colossal Sky Turtle, right?
Yes, Colossal Sky Turtle, I think, is just absolutely broken. Any Simic deck would be happy to have Colossal Sky Turtle. It's 4 green, blue, so 7 total mana for an enchantment creature turtle. It is a 6/5 with flying and ward 2, and it has 2 channel abilities. One is 2 and a green, discard. So channel, for so everyone's aware, is you pay a cost and you discard the card, and then you get the effect. So its first channel ability is 2 and a green, discard Colossal Sky Turtle, return target card from your graveyard to your hand.
This is a regrowth.
So regrowth.
1
Yep.
additional
Or
mana.
Balagad recovery type effect. And then the other one is 1 in a blue, discard Colossal Sky Turtle, return target creature to its owner's hand. So a bounce effect. So it's you get to choose to either have a 6/5 flyer or return something to your hand or bounce something for someone else. And in decks that play this, they have reanimator strategies. Sometimes you get both, which is awesome.
And also, a 7 mana 6/5 flyer with Ward 2 is also just a beefy creature.
Yeah, that's a beater. That's a
huge.
big beater.
And notably, this is an ability, so it is not a spell. You can't counter if someone plays a counter spell, they cannot target this effect.
Yeah, exactly. There are some that counter abilities, but those are pretty few and far between. So this is going to be pretty safe. Some other examples of this are like Boseiju Who Endures and Otawara Soaring City, which are the channel lands. They are lands that tap for mana. When you play them, they enter untapped. And then you can pay their channel cost. So for Boseiju, that's 1 in a green. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls, and they can search for a land with a basic land type and put it onto the battlefield. And then Otawara, Soaring City, is taps for blue, and it's 3 in a blue. Discard Otawara, return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. And for each of these, the ability costs 1 less for each legendary creature you control.
Yeah, these are really good. I mean, it's a land. It's an untapped land that you could also treat as a spell if you don't need it.
You draw it in the late game. Who cares? I don't want this anymore. I'm going to destroy your Bolas Citadel.
Yeah, they're really great. The next section of multimodal cards that we want to talk about are adventures. So we just got a bunch more of these that were printed in the recent Wilds of Eldraine set. And these are permanent cards that also have an instant or a sorcery stapled onto them that you can cast instead. And when you do, you put the card in exile, and then you can cast the other part of the card, the permanent side of the card, from exile and have it return from its adventure. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty cool. Pretty flavorful. I like that when you cast a spell, it goes on the adventure and then comes back. I think it's really fun. But again, the great part about these effects and some of the other ones we're talking about in the multimodal section is that you get both a permanent and an instant or sorcery, so it grants you just a ton of flexibility.
And generally, these cards and all the cards that we're talking about in multimodal, they're generally not cards that are good enough that you just play them on their own, but it has two effects that together, having the flexibility of both, makes them good enough that you want to play both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, by itself, I don't know that I would play. I just forgot its name. Colossal Sky Turtle. I don't think I need. Yeah. It's a big beater. It's great, but the fact that it also is like two other spells is pretty amazing.
Yep.
So some examples of this, and I'm gonna meme a little bit because these are all kind of gonna be similar cards. Are Kellen the Fey-Blooded, Kellen Daring Traveler, and Kellen Inquisitive Prodigy.
Kellen's been doing a lot of traveling over the past few sets, if you haven't been following.
Yeah, these are all from the three most recent sets, which I think is really fun. Do you want to tell us about Kellen the Fey-Blooded?
Yeah, absolutely. This is 2 in a red for a 2/2 legendary creature, human fairy with double strike, and other creatures you control get +1/+0 for each aura and equipment attached to Kellen the Fey-Blooded. So I think he was pretty popular as a commander when Wilds of Eldraine came out. It's just like this really cool anthem effect, and you can also cast him for his adventure, which is a sorcery called Birthright Boon, which is 1 and a white, and you search your library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So you get to first find the aura or the equipment, and then you get to cast Kellen and attach it to him, which is really cool.
Yeah, really, really sweet. And one thing to mention with these is Kellen was pretty popular as a commander, and part of that reason is because cards with adventure count as both colors. So Kellen costs 2 and a red, and the adventure, Birthright Boon, is 1 and a white. So together it's a Boros commander, which I think is really, really cool. Yep. The next Kellen Daring Traveler, is... I think it's so funny that they're all Kellen, is 1 and a white for a 2/3 legendary creature, human fairy scout. And whenever he attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card with mana value of 3 or less, you can put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. And then the adventure is Journey On, which costs a green for sorcery adventure. Create X map tokens, where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. Which I think is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Yeah, and then the last one is Kellen Inquisitive Prodigy. So this is when he was visiting Ravnica as part of Murders at Karlov Manor. And that's 2 green-blue for a 3/4 legendary creature, human fairy detective. So now he's turned into a detective. He has flying and vigilance, and whenever he attacks, you destroy up to 1 target artifact. If you controlled that permanent, you get a draw card. And the adventure is a sorcery, tail the suspect for green and a blue. You investigate, and you may play an additional land this turn. So just like we said, maybe a bit undercosted on each side, but together they're really quite good, and especially in the command zone, it gives you a bunch of extra flexibility. And I believe when you pay commander tax, if you just cast it for the cheaper adventure, you can cast it for the adventure, and then when it gets exiled, you can leave it in exile and cast it for the cheaper. You don't have to pay commander tax for the creature side when you cast it from the adventure, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah. So there's obviously other effects of this. I kind of wanted to meme here because Kellen's wearing a lot of hats, which I think is really fun. Ironically, wearing 0 hats in any of the art.
In the art. They should have given him a hat in the detective art for sure.
Yes, absolutely, a total Sherlock Holmes hat. TM. But there are other examples that aren't Kellen. One of the most famous ones in black is like Murderous Rider, which is 1 black, lifelink 2/3 creature zombie knight. And when it dies, you put it on the bottom of its owner's library, and its adventure is basically murder, right? Swift
really
end, 1 black, instant, destroy target creature, planeswalker, you lose 2 life.
Yeah, really awesome that you can just have removal, and then it comes in as a 2/3 life linker later if you have the mana and don't have anything to spend it on. That's pretty good. This same thing with Bone Crusher Giant. This is 2 in a red for a 4/3 giant. Whenever it becomes the target of a spell, it deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. But most importantly, the adventure is an instant called Stomp, and it's 1 in a red. Damage can't be prevented this turn. Stomp deals 2 damage to any target. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I think the best part about a lot of these is that they're both interaction and a creature. So like the next one, for example, is Brazen Borrower, 1 blue, a 3/1 creature rogue fairy with flash, flying, and Brazen Borrower can block only creatures with flying. But its adventure is Petty Theft, 1 and a blue, instant, return target non-land permanent opponent controls to its owner's hand. The flexibility of these is just absurd, right? You get to, and especially with adventures, it's not an either or, it's one and then the other, right?
Yeah.
Is you get to cast it for the instant.
As long as you do the adventure first, then
Yes.
it's one and then the other. If you cast the creature
exactly.
first, you're out of luck.
Yeah, you're out of luck. You're out of luck unless you can get it back into your hand with Colossal Sky Turtle, maybe.
Or Brazen Borrower.
Or Brazen Borrower.
Oh, no, it only hits opponents.
Yeah,
stuff.
oh, dang it. The thing I've been trying to play a lot more of these, and that's recently because I've been trying to, as I said earlier, turn my Sidisi deck into an Umori companion deck. And so it's really fun. The bonus for me on a lot of these is that they're attached to a creature, because Sidisi Brood Tyrant cares about milling creatures. I've talked about her, I think, in every episode, but it's the deck I've been working on recently. The best part of these is you also get instants and sorceries, so it counts as only running creatures, but you still get that effect, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and that's what Umori cares about, right? In order to be the companion for the deck Umori, you have to have only permanents or only creatures?
All of your non-land cards need to be the same card type.
Gotcha.
So you
could do all. I guess you couldn't do all spells or anything because your commander is part of the deck.
Because you need your commander. yeah, exactly. But
very cool. Well, the next part that we want to talk about is Transmute cards. This is kind of a wacky mechanic. It did get reprinted as part of Ravnica Remastered, so there are more copies of these running around. It's helped bring the price down on some of them a little bit. These are cards where you can pay a Transmute cost and search your deck for a card with the same mana value as the transmuted card. So a couple of the more popular ones are Modal the Mixture, which is blue for counter target instant or sorcery spell. So once again, just a card that you would play because you need to be playing interaction. And then you can transmute it, pay 1 blue to discard the card and search your library for a card with the same mana value, which would be 2. And then put it into your hand and shuffle. And you can only transmute as a sorcery. So the downside of this is you can't hold up the mana for a counter spell, and then if you don't counter something, transmute it. You do lose a little bit of value that way. But there's plenty of good 2 mana cards in your deck that you might be wanting to find.
If you don't use the counter spell. Yeah, absolutely. And I do feel like if this was instant speed, I was pretty disappointed when I learned that Transmute was an instant speed. I think I would play Transmute.
You want it to be instant speed.
Yes, oh my gosh. It would be so incredibly busted. Yeah. But it is a powerful effect. And requires a little bit of planning, which I think is really cool, because it is something with the same mana value. Another example here that gets some play is Dimir Houseguard. It's a 3 and a black. I was reading this today, and people call it Dimir Houseguard. I think you probably should read it as Dimir House Guard, right? Because it's guarding the Dimir house, I think. Anyway, it's a 2/3 creature skeleton with fear. Sacrifice a creature, regenerate Dimir House Guard. So a pretty decent creature. It's an okay creature, not a great rate, but it has Transmute, 1 black. Again, search your library for a card with the same mana value as Dimir House Guard, so 4, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And you can only do it as a sorcery. We talked about this previously. 4 CMC, 4 mana value is a pretty premium spot, and there's a lot of cards that are quite good that fit in that mana value. So maybe
like
this
Smothering
is one you
Tithe.
should, right? Like Smothering Tithe.
Yeah, so this is going to be especially good if you have some really good value pieces in your deck that sit at these mana costs. There's a bunch of other transmute cards at different mana costs. There's even a land if there's something that you want to get with mana cost 0, which is pretty cool. But this is going to work better if you have a card that you're really looking for, or maybe something that is a combo with your commander or something like that. It's a really integral part of your game plan, and that's a good time to be running these.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A cool interaction that I just thought of. One of the more popular decks recently has been a suspend deck where you get to cast suspend cards. The one that tutors for free spells, you can get any of those suspend spells that don't have mana costs, which is actually kind of sick.
That is really cool.
Okay, so the next one we want to talk about is, again, we've been trying to run it more, cycling. Cycling is an effect that lets you pay a cycling cost, discard the card, and draw a card. Typically, cycling is 2 mana, discard the card, draw a card. There are obviously some exceptions, but it's a way that lets you filter your hand to get rid of some cards that might be less desirable and draw something else that better fits the situation you're currently in.
Yeah, like a card that a lot of decks are going to want to run is Reconnaissance Mission. This is 2 blue whenever for an enchantment that whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Super powerful effect. If you don't have any creatures, this card does nothing. And so it has cycling 2. You can pay 2 mana, discard the card, and draw a card. So you can trade it out for something else. As we were talking about this card earlier, I had never realized that it has cycling because I don't think I've ever cycled this card. It's just so good.
Yeah, it's quite good. But there's probably a scenario in which you do want to cycle it. And actually, I think one of the more popular versions of this that people play a lot is Bident of Thassa, because it does have an activated ability on top of it that forces opponents' creatures to attack. But I don't know how often that's ever been relevant in games that I've played it. And I might prefer to run Reconnaissance Mission.
Because it's not a dead card if you don't have any creatures.
Yeah, exactly. Another example of this is that, again, a lot of these we didn't realize even had cycling because they're good enough that you don't typically want to cycle them. Unearth, which is one black for a sorcery. Return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Cycling 2. So in a situation where you just don't need this card, pay 2 mana, discard it, draw something else.
If you don't have any good targets in your graveyard.
Yeah, exactly. Someone just exiled your graveyard because they learned to play Graveyard Hate.
Yeah, that's something that our play group has learned quite a bit since Spencer started playing so many Reanimator decks.
Boo, play less Graveyard Hate.
The next card that I want to talk about, I really like +1/+1 counter decks. So this is Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, 1 in a green for a legendary artifact. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on an artifact or creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters, wow, that is a mouthful, are put on it instead. What's cool about this card, there are quite a few cards that have this same effect where you get to add an additional counter if you were to put it on something. What's really cool about this is it also can put counters on things. So you pay 1 in a green and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target artifact or creature you control, activate only as a sorcery. And then, for whatever reason, don't understand why, staple to the bottom of this card, cycling 2. If you don't want this really great +1/+1 counter piece in your deck, you can cycle it away and draw a card.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this, I was like, oh yeah, Hardened Scales does the same thing. And then I didn't realize that it also puts the +1/+1 counter on it, which becomes 2 +1/+1 counters.
Yep. Pay 2 mana, tap it, put 2 +1/+1 counters.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's so good.
And cycle.
And you can cycle it.
Yep.
And if you ever need, I mean, we joke about you not ever wanting to cycle these, but there's real scenarios in which you're in the late game, someone has a big threat on board, and you draw Ozolith the Shattered Spire, and you're like, crap.
This does nothing for me.
This is not helping me right now. Yeah. Pay 2 mana, throw it away, and hopefully draw into something better.
But you can also do it instant speed, right? You can cycle at instant speed. So what's great about that is if you hold up interaction for someone on someone else's turn, nothing comes up, you now have mana that you need to use. You can pitch one of these cards to draw a card.
Yeah, a really cool effect. Some other examples, again, Neutralize is a counter spell. It's like cancel, 1 blue, counter target spell, cycling 2. Step Through is an interesting one. 3 blue sorcery. It's a bounce spell, which is sweet. Return 2 target creatures to their owner's hands, and it has wizard cycling too.
Yeah, so you pay to discard the card. You search your library for a wizard, reveal it, put it into your hand. So you're not just drawing a card; you're actually searching your library for a specific card, and that is pretty sweet. So if there's a wizard in particular that you need for your game plan, this just tutors for a wizard for 2 mana, which is pretty cool.
Yes. There was a while where you were playing Sage of Hours in your deck, which is a wizard. Were you playing Step Through in that deck?
I didn't know about Step Through at that time.
My goodness.
That was one of the first commander decks I ever built, was an Azuri Claw of Progress deck that ran Sage of Hours as a win condition. You can take infinite turns. And if I had known about Step Through, I definitely would have played it in that deck.
That's a pretty sweet one, especially because it's only 2 mana. A 2 mana tutor for something is pretty wild. Another one here that kind of breaks the mold a little bit is Street Wraith, which Kelton pointed out it's a creature wraith, which is now a relevant creature type with the Lord of the Rings printings.
Yeah.
A lot of people are running wraith cards in their decks. It has Swamp Walk, 3/4, cycling pay 2 life, which is sweet. We talked about last episode paying life for effects. This is pay life to replace this with something more useful when you need to.
Yeah, that's great. If you need a 3/4 Swamp Walk, then it's a perfectly serviceable creature, but it also puts itself in your graveyard if you care about having things in your graveyard. If you need things to collect evidence with, this is a great card for collect evidence. You can just put it into your graveyard for free and draw a card. I mean, it's not free. You're paying 2 life. Practically free, and then you draw a card.
Free. Yeah. Practically free in our 40 life format.
Yeah.
2 other ones here that we wanted to talk about. Kelton put one of these on here. I'm going to talk about the one that I put on, which is Slice and Dice. It's a really bad board wipe, but kind of cool. It's 4 red for a sorcery. Deals 4 damage to each creature. Again, like I said, not a very great board wipe. But it has cycling for 2 and a red, and when you cycle it, you may have it deal 1 damage to each creature, which I think is really cool because you also still get to draw the card. So you discard it, draw a card, and then you can have it deal 1 damage to everything. So you kind of get to pitch it away and maybe get a few creatures off the board. If someone's playing a token deck, this is great.
Yeah, that's true. It is really good. And it's just cool to get additional effects when you're cycling a card. The one that I put on here is Titanith Rex. So this was in a Reanimator deck where I wanted to cycle away this 11/11 Trampler.
Oh my gosh, I didn't see it was so big.
But when you cycle, you pay 1 and a green to discard it, draw a card, and when you cycle it, you put a trample counter on a target creature you control. So if you have another big creature out, you can give it trample too. So lots of reasons to play this 9 mana 11/11 dinosaur beast.
Yeah, but and again, instant speed, right? So someone throws a blocker in front of your big thing that has infect or whatever.
Give it trample.
Yeah, pretty sweet. Yep. We talked about X cycling, so like wizard cycling with step through. Another type of cycling is land cycling.
There have been some very good land cyclers recently. With the Lord of the Rings set, we got 1 for each color. And the 3 best ones are the Grixis ones, so blue, black, and red. So the blue one is Lorien Revealed. So this is just 5 mana for a sorcery. You draw 3 cards. It's fine in the late game if you draw it and you just need to draw cards, pay 5 mana, draw 3 cards. But what's crazy is it has island cycling 1. So you can pay 1 mana to search your library for any island. So that can hit triomes, it can hit dual lands, and you just get to put that card into your hand. So this is practically turns any of your islands in your deck into a tap land.
Yeah, well, in itself it is to some degree, right? Like you just get to pay a mana and have a land drop on your turn that you may have missed, and you lose out on this effect. But like, it's like we said, it's mostly in the late game. You're going to cast it if you really need to draw some extra cards, right? Hopefully you have better options. Yeah. The other one here is Troll of Khazad-dûm, which is 5 and a black creature troll for a 6/5, and it can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures, which is really sweet, really good. This gets a lot of play in Vintage Cube, right? It's really strong there. And it has swamp cycling 1. So same thing, you get to search for any swamp, notably not a basic swamp or basic island, right?
Anything
I think
that says swamp on it.
Yeah, it makes it, yeah, exactly. In the type line. Yeah. In the type line. Some things say swamp elsewhere.
Sure. On the type line, yeah. And then the red one is Oliphant, and this is 5 and a red for a 6/4 Trampler. Whenever it attacks, another target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn, and it has mountain cycling 1. And what's one thing to note specifically about Oliphant and Troll of Khazad-dûm, they're pretty big creatures, and they're creatures that have great effects on the board, and they're really easy to get into your graveyard. So if you are playing a Reanimator deck, these aren't the best Reanimator targets, but they can be Reanimator targets in a pinch. So you can early in the game cycle them for a land to get the right colored land that you need, get it into play, and then later in the game, maybe this comes back out of your graveyard as a 6/4 Trampler, and that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, these are definitely like one-on-one format all-stars, right?
Yeah,
but potentially not as good in Commander outside of their cycle effect, but still like viable is what we're trying to say. They're really awesome. So these are land cyclers. These have land cycling, and now we're going to talk about cycling lands, which are lands that have the cycling ability, which I think are honestly some of the best cyclers that you want in a deck, right? Because getting flooded is a problem sometimes, right? End of the game, you're drawing a bunch of lands. You're like, oh my gosh, I need an actual play here. Most of these all have the cycling ability. Some of them for different mana values. Some of them have 2 mana. Some of them cost 1. But you get to discard it and draw something else, which is really relevant if you're trying to, if you have enough lands and you're just trying to get something to actually play on your turns.
Yeah, I think some of the best cycles of these are the dual ones. So there's a cycle, but I'll just read an example of one of them. Sheltered Thicket is a land mountain forest, so they are fetchable, which is kind of cool. They enter the battlefield tapped, and then they have cycling 2. So you can pay 2 mana to discard the card and draw a card. And then the Triomes. Triomes are so good. So these are lands that have 3 different land types. So in the instance of Ketrio Triome, it's a forest island mountain, and it taps for any of those colors. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it has cycling 3. So you have to pay 3 mana to discard the card and draw it.
Yes, and I think we have a full cycle of both of these, right? Because the Triomes, we had the Triomes, and then we had the Headquarters from New Capenna, which finished off the cycle, which is really cool. So yeah, any of your 3-color decks that need one of these lands, albeit they're a little bit on the pricier side because they are so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, they can really.
The dual ones aren't pricey.
No, the dual ones are quite cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, all of these cards will just add a lot of flexibility to your deck and help you get out of a pinch and not just be dead cards in your hand when you don't need them.
Because you want to be playing enough lands in your deck that you're hitting your land drops early in the game and that you're able to get the lands when you need them. But that also means that you're going to be drawing lands late in the game. And that's why these cycling lands are so good. And the next cards that we're going to talk about, which are MDFCs. And so this is short for Modal Double-Faced Cards. So these are cards that have a card on the front of the card and a card on the back of the card, and you choose which version you're going to play. A lot of the most played cards are a spell on one side and a land on the other side, but sometimes they're both spells. So a couple of the ones that are both spells that are really popular are Burgi, God of Storytelling. So this is 2 in a red for a god, 3/3. She has the ability, whenever you cast a spell, you add red mana until the end of turn. You don't lose this mana steps and phases end, and creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. The boast part doesn't come up very often.
No.
I mean, maybe it does sometimes, but it hasn't come up for me yet. But now that I think about it, I do have a Vargoth
That's exactly what I thought of.
that would be really good to boast twice. But mostly you're either going to be playing Burgi to get additional red mana in Spellslinger decks, or the other side of Burgi is Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, which is 4 and a red for a legendary artifact. Discard a card. It has the ability, discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. Really good.
Yeah, quite good. Yeah, both sides of these are kind of a banger and have places in different decks. You play this one in your Prosper deck because you need those exile effects, right?
I do. The exile effect is really good. I actually also play this card in a couple of my red Spellslinger decks because I like playing the Burgi side of it. So it's really fun to be able to have decks that utilize both sides of this card.
Yeah, no surprise. This one's kind of a format all-star. Yeah. The other one here is Flame Scroll Celebrant. Probably sees more play in CDH, but it's 1 in a red for a 2/1 creature human shaman with the ability, whenever an opponent activates an ability that isn't a mana ability, Flame Scroll Celebrant deals 1 damage to that player, and you can pay 1 in a red, and it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And then the flip side is the reason it sees some play, especially in red-white decks. White instant. Your opponents can't cast spells or activate Planeswalker's loyalty abilities this turn. Exile Revel in Silence. Cool. It's called Revel in Silence. Sorry.
This is the silence effect.
Yeah, it's a silence effect, which is quite good.
That is cool. Very cool. Oh, the other cards that we really love playing that are MDFCs are the MDFC lands. They're awesome because early in the game, if you don't have many lands, you can play them as a land, or you can hold them up as spells for later in the game. And there are some that are much better than the others and see a ton of play. An example would be Malakir Rebirth. It, on one side, is a land that taps for black that enters the battlefield tapped. But on the other side, it is a instant for 1 black mana, which says choose target creature, you lose 2 life. Until end of turn, that creature gains. Whenever this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So it's a feign death effect that's also a land when you need it to be a land, and that is so good.
Yeah, it's quite good. A lot of these I like to run because I don't like running lands. I know I run enough, right? I usually run, I think 36 is typically my number for like the number of lands I run.
It used to be a lot lower than that.
It used to be a lot lower, but to be fair, I was new and was being a little polluted by CDH, which I didn't realize was very different at the time.
Was a different game.
Was a completely different game than Casual Commander. But it lets me artificially, not even artificially, it lets me inflate my land count and also have spells, right? Yep. Like you get to have 38 lands, and 2 of them are these type of spells. The other one, another one is Balaga Recovery, which is, we mentioned earlier in the show, just kind of in passing, but it's 2 and a green, return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and then the flip side is a land that enters tap that taps for green.
Yeah, and this is the Colossal Sky Turtle.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah. There's a red one that's printed at Mythic, and it is X red for a sorcery. It deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, it deals twice X damage divided as you choose among them instead. Pretty cool. What's cool about the Mythic ones is that the other side, the lands, they can enter untapped. So as Shatterskull, the Hammer Pass, enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and it enters for red.
Yes.
These are the Bolt lands that I've been wanting.
Yes, I know! So, Wizards, please print Bolt lands. This is obviously only taps for 1 color, but we've talked about the Shock lands. The card Shock deals 2 damage. The Shock lands enter untapped if you get shocked voluntarily, right? This is the same thing, but for Lightning Bolt, which does 3 damage. I really think they should print...
Give me the Bolt lands.
Dual color Bolt lands, yes.
Or if you want to be generous, make them tricolor.
Yeah, make them tricolor Bolt lands.
Sweet.
Oh my gosh, they couldn't have cycling, or else they would be just strictly better.
You get one damage for each color.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty sweet.
I'd play them.
I would 100%. The last one here is Valakut Awakening, 2 and a red, printed it rare for an instant. Put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1. We also mentioned this in passing when we were talking about the Fervent Mastery. Yeah. Yep. Someone gets to do this for free if you cast Fervent Mastery for cheap, so don't play that card. It's not on our list of things you should play. The backside is Valakut Stoneforge, enters the battlefield tapped, and you add 1 red.
Yep, very cool. Just all of we talked about a lot of different things here, a lot of different groupings of multimodal cards that just have different values at different stages of the game, and it just makes your deck way more flexible and gives you multiple effects in the same card slot, which is really cool. So these are great things that we would recommend trying out. The next, I guess the last section of cards that we want to talk about, these are cards that make the game more interactive. These are cards that I really, really like. And things like the Monarch, or the cards that give Monarch or Initiative and introduce those into the game, they're cards that get people attacking each other and making deals and discussing things at the table. I'd have to say that my all-time favorite version of this effect is Coveted Jewel. So Coveted Jewel is a 6-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 3 cards. It taps for 3 mana of any one color. And then whenever 1 or more creatures an opponent controls attack you and aren't blocked, that player draws 3 cards, gains control of Coveted Jewel, and untaps it. So this is such a cool card. I love a card that costs 6 colorless mana, draws me 3 cards, and it can immediately tap for 3 mana of any color. That is such a cool card. And then additionally, it adds this additional flavor to the game. Obviously, I would prefer to play it in a game where I can easily get it back if someone takes it from me, or I can prevent someone from ever taking it, and I just have a 3-mana mana rock, which is pretty sweet. So I just absolutely love this card, and especially I have a Blink deck that really likes this card, and especially when it's paired with Displacer Kitten. It gets pretty nasty when it's paired with Displacer Kitten.
Yes, I was going to say, Kelton, do you really love the interaction portion of this, or do you like abusing it? Because
both.
Because typically when you've played it, no one's ever gotten to take control of it.
You just need to attack harder. I do have a couple of decks that are more combat focused, and I like the extra interaction.
It's really fun. fun. I actually was thinking a deck that I play that this could go in is my Sidri Galvanic Genius deck.
Oh, so
which
cool.
is Sidri is black, white, blue for a 2/2 creature, and you can pay a blue to turn an artifact into an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its mana value, and then you can pay white, black to give it lifelink and death touch. And this would make Coveted Jewel protect itself, which I think is awesome. You could use it as its own blocker.
I love it. They're never getting it.
Yeah, no one's ever
Coveted
getting
Jewel is
through.
going to animate and walk away before before they can take it.
Oh yeah.
Some other cards effects that create these more interactive games, like I mentioned, is Monarch. So Monarch is an effect where at the beginning of your end step, if you are the Monarch, you get to draw an additional card, and someone can take the Monarch from you if they deal combat damage to you. So some popular things that use Monarch are the courts. There's 2 cycles of courts, 2 in each color. A couple of the popular ones are Court of Grace, which is the white one, 2 white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. So there's usually a card that has to introduce Monarch to the game and like make someone the Monarch at the beginning. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. But if you're the Monarch, if you become the Monarch and prevent everyone from dealing combat damage to you until your next turn, you get a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying instead, which is really cool. It's a great effect and very fun. People are going to want to take the Monarch from you, though. They're not going to let you keep that. Another one is Court of Gardenbrigg. This is a new one from the Wilds of Eldraine commander decks. It's 1 green for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, distribute 2 1/1 counters among up to 2 target creatures. First off, this is a great card.
Yeah.
Alone, just 1 green for enchantment that gives you 2 1/1 counters every upkeep. But then what's wild is if you're the Monarch, you double the number of 1/1 creature or 1/1 counters on each creature you control.
Yeah.
So you get the 2 and then you double everything.
If anyone was watching my face while you were talking about Court of Grace, I was reading Court of Gardenbrigg. And at first I thought you did one and then you did the other. Because a lot of them say instead, right? So distribute 2 +1/+1 counters or double the number of +1/+1 counters instead. No, this is distribute 2 +1/+1 counters and then double. It's so good. Crazy.
A lot of the courts from Wild of Eldraine Commander are very good and do similar effects to this, where you get an additional thing if you're the Monarch,
holy cow.
There's another Monarch card that you like playing that I don't like playing against. That's Emberwild Captain. Do you want to tell us about that one?
Yes. I will say this. I played this in a deck of mine that I'm now taking apart because it's a great commander. Ishin, 2 Heavens is 1. I just did not build it very well. It was in a budget. It was a budget night, and I was still getting my deck building legs under me. But it is a 3 and a red for a 4/2 creature Djinn Pirate with the abilities. Whenever Captain enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. Hooray. So great. Whenever an opponent attacks you while you're the Monarch, Emberwild Captain deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards in their hand, which is sweet because it tries to keep you the Monarch. And in a deck like Ishin 2 Heavens is 1, where he doubles all attack triggers of permanents you control, they lose twice that life, and
That's
so
much life.
Maybe they're less likely to attack and take the Monarch.
So you're just drawing cards every end step because no one's able to take the Monarch from you because it's just too much life to lose.
Yes, fingers crossed.
Another one of these effects I really like is Palace Jailer, 2 white for a 2/2 human soldier. This was actually reprinted recently in Commander Masters and the Lord of the Rings Commander deck, so it's very accessible now. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. Also, when it enters the battlefield, you exile target creature an opponent controls until an opponent becomes the Monarch. So it's cool. It's a Oblivion Ring creature that gives you the Monarch. They get it back when someone else deals combat damage. But this is one of those social interactions that I was talking about where you can say, hey, everyone, we're really worried about this creature over here, so I'm going to get rid of it. But if you attack me, it comes back. It de-incentivizes people from stealing the Monarch from you, and you just get to draw an extra card every turn.
Yeah, that's an example of armed diplomacy.
It's great. No, everyone loves it, Spencer. I don't know what you're talking about. It's a win-win
I
for
love
everybody.
negotiating with a gun to my head. That's exactly what I'm looking for with Palace Jailer.
I love it.
Another thing that you've talked about that you've liked playing recently is the initiative, which is another way to add some more interactivity into the game with the players. The initiative, for those who don't know, is when you gain the initiative, you venture into the Undercity. If you aren't in a dungeon already, right? Or is it in addition to other dungeons?
Nope, if you aren't in a dungeon already.
If you aren't in a dungeon already, yep. The Undercity is a special dungeon that they made for the initiative. And then if you have the initiative at the beginning of your upkeep, you venture to the dungeon again. So when you gain the initiative, you venture, and then at your upkeep, you venture again. And a lot of cards care about having the initiative. So this was a really popular deck in, I think, Modern for a while that cared about the initiative. White Plume Adventurer, which you pointed out, is quite a good card, even if you don't care about the initiative in your deck. Right?
Yeah, and I it's very accessible now. Like you said, it was popular in Modern for a little while. Was it Modern? I don't remember which format it was
I can't
popular
remember.
in, but it definitely was a little more expensive for a little while. So you can pick it up now for less than $1. It's a 3-mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you take the initiative, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you untap a creature you control. And if you've completed a dungeon, you untap all creatures you control instead. So White Plume Adventure, quite an all-star there.
Yeah, pretty sweet. I'm actually considering whether or not I should be putting this in my Garth deck that cares about tapping and untapping. That's
Probably
pretty cool.
because you get to do it at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
so it
that's a
allows
sweet
you to
card.
get in with a big creature, untap it so it's a good blocker, or if it's a creature that has an activated ability that you care about, you can activate that multiple times, which is pretty sweet. The next one is another white card, Seasoned Dungeoneer, 3 and a white for a 3/4 human warrior. When it enters the battlefield, you take the initiative, and then whenever you attack, target attacking cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard gains protection from creatures until end of turn, and it explores. Which, if you need a reminder for that keyword, you reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, you put a 1/1 counter on the creature, then put the card back or put it into your graveyard. So you get a 3-mana or a 4-mana 3/4 that gives you the initiative, and then whenever you attack, it gets bigger and can't be blocked.
Yeah, that's really good.
Cool.
That's really good, especially in decks that this is obviously like trying to deal with the party mechanic, which cares specifically about clerics, rogue, or wizards, or warriors. But the fact that this is a warrior itself, like it's both of these cards can just kind of stand alone as initiative cards in your deck, which is really cool. And the last one here is From the Catacombs, which is 3 black for a sorcery, printed at rare. Put target creature card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under your control with a corpse counter on it. You take the initiative. If that creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. And then it has Escape, 3 black, exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. This is interesting to me. What is a corpse counter, and why does it matter?
I actually don't know if I've ever recognized that part of the card when I
It
played
seems
it.
like they're trying to tie it to the exile instead of putting it anywhere else, but they don't mention the corpse counter. They did
wonder if this
finality
was-
counters recently.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if this is a precursor to finality counters. From
Yes,
Lost
but I
Caverns
love
of
that it just
Ixalan.
says with a corpse counter on it and then never mentions it ever again.
What's really funny is even if you remove the corpse counter, it doesn't prevent it from getting exiled if it dies.
No, yeah, it's just a random.
And you can just proliferate corpse counters. Which is that's like 6 corpse counters that do nothing. Well, you know what? There are decks that care about counters on things. There's a lot of cards that have been printed recently where if a creature has a counter on it, then you destroy everything without a counter on it, or you phase out things that have counters on them, and it's a way to protect your stuff. But that is weird. I've never noticed that.
Yeah, that is kind of bizarre. I mean, okay, so I just did a quick little search just so we can give people closure. There are other cards that have corpse counters on them, so maybe you can move this corpse counter to those somehow. That seems pretty niche to just staple on corpse
niche.
counter to this card.
Yeah, well, it's a rare. I guess they can just staple stuff onto it. That's awesome. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We really hope that you learned about some cards that you might want to play. Like we said, these are just things that we've been enjoying recently and can fill some slots in your deck. So join us next week for another new episode. You can find us here on YouTube, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also reach out to us at thecommanderpod.com. And that's going to be it for this week. Until next time.